Well, Graham, here we are. The TV book show is happening thanks to all those people who so generously donated through crowdfunding.
Terrific, isn't it? And over the next few weeks, we'll be having guests each week and we'll be reviewing books that we've read.
Yes, we will. And meanwhile, the most exciting thing happening this week, I think?
It must be the Man Booker Prize shortlist. The long list of 13 was announced a few weeks back. Now it's the shortlist of 6.
And it's been opened up, hasn't it, this year? So it's been a bit controversial.
Yes, it has. Previously, it's only been open to people who wrote books that were published in England, in English, who lived in the Commonwealth, the UK or Ireland. Now it's any book that's written in English, and any fiction title, I should say, published in English and published in Britain.
So the Americans have been allowed in.
Have.
And on the short list we have 2 Americans, is that right?
2 Americans, 1 Australian, and where's
Three.
the other? Three, with
Three British.
3 British writers, 2 Americans and 1 Australian. So the
Right.
Commonwealth's hanging in there.
Right, that's good. And tell us a bit about the origins of it.
Well, it started back in 1968 and it was the McConnell Booker Prize, and gradually it got shortened to just being called the Booker Prize.
Right.
Then in 2002, the Man Group, a financial group in the UK, became the sponsors and they became called the Man Booker Prize, and they increased the prize money to £50,000, which is a huge prize. And it's not just the money, of course, it's the prestige of being on the shortlist and, of course, ultimately winning it. The winner ensures the book's in print almost forever.
Yes, and of course our wonderful Eleanor Catton with the Luminaries won it last year, and of course her book will stay in print hopefully forever.
Well, yes, I mean, Kerry Hume is the other New Zealander who won it. That was way back in 1985, and that book's still in print, The Bone People.
Yeah. Now, there's a lovely thing on your blog from Kathy Lett, who has moaned about the fact there are only 2 women amongst these 6 finalists, and she's got this lovely comment about the Booker judges having been at Oxford so long they've got ivy growing up the back of their legs. I think it's worth people looking up your blog to see all the information about the Booker finalists, but also about what Kathy Lett has had to say.
Yes, very funny piece, wasn't it? Yes. And of course you've been away, Carol.
Yes, well, I was in Edinburgh. For the first time ever, I've been to the Edinburgh Book Festival, which was very exciting, and I banged into Witi Ihumira there, so we've had a chat about it. Witi, it was lovely to see you at the Edinburgh International Book Festival.
Oh my God, when I saw you, I just about fell over backwards, because even though there were 200 New Zealanders there who were performing in the Fringe Festival, and also the festival itself, like Michael Houston was there, it's great to see a mate.
Right. Yes, it was lovely. And you were the only writer, New Zealand writer, actually in the book festival part of the Edinburgh Festival.
Well, you know, that was such a pity, really, because if there'd been 3 or 4 of us, then we might have got a little bit more energy going within that festival. And I think that that's the way we should go. When I was at Cheltenham, for instance, there were 2 of us plus 3 Australians.
Right.
So, you know, we made quite a crunch on the whole of that occasion.
Right. Nevertheless, it was an amazing festival. I mean, I spent 2 weeks going to see fabulous international writers like, you know, Margaret Drabble and Amy Bloom and Sarah Waters and Ali Smith and Jackie Kay and Sebastian
and
Barry.
Nicola Barker and Chimamanda.
Yeah, Ngozi Adichie.
Yes. Wow, all of these people from overseas all coming to Edinburgh because it is one of those oldest festivals in the world.
Yeah, it's been going a long time, and it's heralded as the biggest literary festival in the world. Now that is probably because it's 2 weeks long, and they get this huge range of authors and a huge range of audience, but in fact, and it's all in those marquees, in the tents, with wooden walkways between them all, because if it rains you're going to get very muddy feet on the grass. But in fact, the biggest tent took only 600 people, which fascinated me, so it books out very early. Now in Auckland, if we have the big events in the big ASB Theatre in the Aotea Centre, we can seat nearly 2,500 people when it's full. And
what I thought was fascinating, that they're using the whole of their city as a literary and fringe festival and festival venues. So, for instance, you could go to the Craig Lockhart War Hospital and hear poets talking about Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon. So I really enjoyed that whole business of getting out and beyond. However, the square itself is small.
Yes, it is. But they use, as you say, they used every possible venue in Edinburgh for all the events. There were churches, there were hospitals, there were hotel rooms, anything, any venue.
And they also used it wasn't just literature books, it was literature plays, it was literature musicals, it was literature political debate. You could also go to the university and hear lectures being held. So
a
I
whole
thought that was
city's
fascinating.
involved.
Oh, it was
Yeah,
a
the whole
buzz, a real buzz.
Yeah. So I'll tell you about one of the, talking about literary plays, I'll tell you about one of the best plays I saw, and then you tell me about the one you saw. I loved Rebecca Vaughan, who actually came to the Auckland Writers' Festival this year doing Austen's Women, and I recognised her name from Auckland on the Fringe programme, so my friend and I booked to go and see her do Dalloway. She did a one-woman show in this beautiful green dress with just a chaise lounge, and it took an hour and 25 minutes, and she did the whole of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and I was in tears at the end. We were both in tears. It was absolutely magnificent, and she may well come, hopefully, to Auckland again next year and do both Austen's Women and Dalloway.
Was
Stunning.
that in there? Because they do their things thematically. So what I was interested in was that you could go to these reading workshops, they call them. So was that in the reading workshop?
No, it was just a theatre performance on the Fringe.
Right.
So tell us about the one that we both went to that you loved.
Oh, it was, I want to say Nikki Kay, but it's not. What's her
Jackie
name?
Kay.
Jackie Kay.
Yeah, Jackie Kay.
Well, you know the election's down here.
Yes.
So, yeah, Jackie Kay's piece, which had earlier been on in Glasgow,
The Lamplighter.
would have so much resonance for us here.
Oh.
But what I was really interested in was the Scottish people really considering slavery and their role in slavery, and they weren't afraid to address that. But apart from that, from anything else, that reading, which you saw,
Oh, it was extraordinary. This lineup of stunning black actors who had performed already in Glasgow at the Commonwealth Games and then redid it at the Edinburgh Book Festival. They were extraordinary.
Yeah.
Excuse me, and really the audience was very moved and just gave them the most incredible standing ovation at the end.
Well, look, there were also what they called the pavilion letters home. It was, and they had
Interesting
commissioned.
concept.
Yes,
Yeah.
they had commissioned local drama groups to then create out of the short fiction from.
A range of
a
authors.
range
There
of
was,
authors.
Because Christos Sulcus
Christos
wrote one
Sulcus
of them,
was
didn't he?
there,
And
yes.
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie
Yes.
wrote another one.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it
Four
was
writers.
making literature live. It was
Yeah.
actually dramatising what we normally see the authors themselves reading. And I just thought that was really terrific.
It
because
was, and the whole audience moved around. So
Yeah.
it was a group of about 4 groups of about 20
Yeah.
people, and you moved from venue to venue and saw
Yeah.
each of the 4 plays.
Yeah.
And I found Chimamanda's one particularly
Well,
moving. It was
I had to
extraordinary.
go to that. I had, I definitely was in tears after that one.
Mm.
So it was really terrific. And then they had another theme that I was really interested in, which was the one about the First World War.
Yes.
And so
Inevitable in this year.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I think that they were clever because otherwise you could get lost at that festival.
Yes. Yes.
There was a lot on, a lot of small sessions, a lot of small venues.
Yeah.
But you could easily get lost. I mean, you were fortunate to be able to get around for 2 weeks. I
know.
envy you.
You were only there for a few days.
I was
weren't you?
only there for a few days.
So tell me about your 3 events. You were in 3 events, I think, weren't you?
Yes, and they were about language. They were about the Scottish referendum. What could the New Zealand experience give to Scotland?
Right.
Because I think actually in the next few days they're going into that referendum.
Yes.
So that was the second one. The third one was with myself and a Scots Australian author and a
Right.
poet, and we were all considering the politics of post-colonialism.
So identity.
Identity.
That was the one that I went to, and I seem to remember that you objected really to the Australian concept of hyphenated people. So the people who come from Greece, for example, are Greek-Australian. They're Greek-Australian, and this is a foreign concept to a Maori way of
especially to
thinking,
us,
isn't it?
because
Yeah.
in New Zealand, I was trying to make the point that in New Zealand we don't like hyphenations anymore. I mean, there might have been a time when we, said Māori Pākehā or Pākehā Māori, but we don't do that because we are New Zealanders. We do recognise that there are differences, but basically, we are really not on the same page as they are.
Right.
So it was fantastic for me to actually be with my peers, but also to see this younger people coming up, Carol.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, we better just watch out because, they're going to push us out of the way.
Well, that's good. That's good. we want young, interesting new young people coming up.
I want them to know more about New Zealand literature, though.
Right.
I really think
yeah.
that, we could have done better there,
Yes.
by having a bigger framework of writers.
What were the absolute highlights for you?
Well, actually, they were more to do with the themes of the conference than the festival and the festival itself. That that whole hyphenated thing is what actually the Scots are going head to head with the English about in terms of their parliamentary process. So, when I was walking around, I was really interested in what Scots people thought of their future.
Right.
But my God, there was some wonderful young people there. I mean, you had to watch. I mean, I felt I'm going to have to let go of all of this because they are so talented, Carol.
Yeah, there are some
really
very talented people. Yeah.
And Irvine Welsh was there, and George Martin was there. I mean, a lot of those younger people, I think that we have to get younger people into our festivals. They were coming because of Game of Thrones. So I was really interested in that whole dynamic between film and television, as well as between literature and theatre.
Which you were involved in as well, of course, because of the film of Whale Rider. That was one of your sessions,
and
wasn't
Nicola
it?
Barker.
Nicola Barker.
What a wonderful, wonderful writer she is, and yet she doesn't really appear. So they were magic moments because you knew that you couldn't see them anywhere else.
Right, well, Nicola Barker apparently doesn't come to festivals normally. And Ali Smith, of course, was a guest selector. Ali Smith was just a delight and very funny and is very, very clever. And Ali Smith invited a variety of writers, including Nicola Barker. And I think that's why Nicola Barker agreed to go, because it was Ali Smith. And she was funny. I mean, I've always thought of Nicola Barker's books as quite difficult because she's very sort of intellectual. And she was funny.
I quite like that whole idea of having guest selectors. Yeah. Because it takes it beyond the frame of of the usual selection process. But another one of those workshop sessions that I really liked was that these writers were so unselfish. They were choosing books that they loved, and they were then reading from those books and telling people why they loved them.
Yes.
So I went to the one on Charlotte's Web.
Right.
You
Fantastic,
know,
yeah.
And The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway.
Yes.
And they were crowded.
Yes.
There were people who wanted to go back to these old masters.
Yes.
They wanted to go back to these stories and books that they had loved.
Rediscovering them.
And reading, always reading. Their bookshop was completely full of people. I don't know if they were buying any books, Carol.
Well, I think they did. They're actually very trusting. People could walk around there with bags and just pick up books. I thought they were very trusting in their bookshop. You've got your autobiography coming out, or part one of it, very soon.
Yes,
Is that the next thing for you, Wiki?
It's called A Memoir of Childhood, Māori Boy. And so we're just finishing doing the whakapapa for it, the genealogy, which will come at the very end, because I'm just telling stories about my family and about growing up. And as you know from memoirs, they are creative non-fiction, but clearly I've tried very, very hard to maintain the reality in them.
I've seen the cover of it. It's absolutely beautiful. The elderly woman holding the small boy by the hand. And if you look closely at the photo of that small boy, it is very clearly Witi Ihimāera. It's been really lovely to talk to you, Witi. Thank you.
Kia ora.
I'm going to talk to you about some crime fiction titles this evening. The first one, a New Zealand one, Paul Thomas's Fallout. This is a Tito Ihaka novel. Tito Ihaka is a rather maverick Auckland cop, and this is the fifth in the series that Paul Thomas has written. Ihaka's boss is the area superintendent for Auckland, and he's retiring, and there's a cold case that happened way back in 1987 at an election night party, and he wants it cleaned up. It happened on his beat, and he wants it cleaned up before he retires, so he gives Ihaka the task of trying to put the case to bed. It's called Fallout because 1987 was back against the backdrop of the nuclear ship standoff that we were having with the Americans. It's a jolly good read. Another one, this from a different part of the world, Sweden, Lars Kepler, The Sandman, and Juna Linna Thriller, and this is the fourth, and he's a detective inspector in Sweden. Lars Kepler, it's interesting because the author, this is actually a pseudonym for a husband and wife team who write these books. Titles, crime fiction titles coming out of these countries are really sought after these days. And it goes back really to The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson, which was published in 2008 and which went on to sell millions of copies. It was the first in a trilogy by Stieg Larsson, the Millennium Trilogy. Sadly, he died before they were published, but it really did draw a lot of attention to crime fiction writers in Scandinavia. One of the authors who appeared shortly after that was Joe Nesbo. He's a Norwegian writer. He had 8 or 10 books already published in Norwegian. They tried out by publishing 2 of them in English. They were huge bestsellers, and so all 8 and 10 titles have since been translated into English, and he's since written 2 or 3 more. Perhaps the very first person out of the Scandinavian countries, though, that drew real attention was Henning Mankell, who of course wrote the Kurt Wallander mysteries. Wallander became a really famous character because the BBC made it into a television series with Kenneth Branagh playing the role of Wallander. This is interesting. This might be his last book. It's a novella, and at the back of the book he has a section here which he calls How It Started, How It Finished, and What Happened in Between. And he explains why, how he came to write the Wallander series and why this is the last book in the series. It's very interesting from a, you know, if you're interested in the man, and he's also got an afterword there. So there you are, crime fiction, the influence of the Scandinavian writers, and one from our own Paul Thomas. Annabelle, you've written and published 21 cookbooks now, as well as starring in 3 seasons of your award-winning TV series, Annabelle Langbein, the Free Range Cook. Now the latest in the series, the 13-part Annabelle Langbein, the Free Range Cook, through the seasons, has just commenced on TV1 on Saturday nights at 7.
Exciting.
Yes, and I must say I really enjoyed the first episode last Saturday night, and of course it was followed by a victory of the All Blacks over the Springboks. It was a real
Double win.
It was a bonus, yes. And of course you've also published your latest cookbook to tie in with the TV series. You've always been an advocate of seasonal cooking, actually, haven't you? And so this TV program must have been especially enjoyable making.
It really was, and it was quite funny because it's sort of often in life I think things come full circle, and I was such a hippie when I was a teenager and grew all my own food at the age of 16 and planted all these big vegetable gardens up the Wanganui River, and it's a thread that I've always carried, and it was such a pleasure to be able to bring it to life for people. We actually started filming this series more than a year ago, so it was August 2013, when the garden was almost frozen, and it was a matter of working out what is there to eat, you know, and it makes you so much more resourceful because instead of popping off to the shop, you go, well, what have I got? And then following it right through spring, summer, autumn, winter, it just made you really feel enormously lucky and sort of the surprise of nature, the magic of nature. I think it really tuned me into that.
So we saw the first episode was set in winter, so we're seeing the series in the order that you filmed them, are we?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the funny things about that, which is possibly slightly disconcerting to the viewer, is the fact that here we are in midwinter, and in the next 12 weeks we're going to go through spring, summer and autumn. So come Christmas we're going to be harvesting all of our crops.
So, I mean, you've said it's taken over 12 months to make it because you've got 4 seasons. It can't be otherwise. It's a massive commitment to time and energy. How do you do it?
Well, actually it was quite challenging figuring out, because nature can be quite fickle, and with climate change it was a very difficult season last year, and I ended up just carrying on. I planted and planted and planted, but you work back and you go, okay, well if I want broccoli, I know it's going to take 80 days, you know, or if I want leeks it's going to be 120, and because I studied horticulture, it's been a great knowledge bank to be able to draw on, and then making the food work, because I think, you know, today in Auckland it's a horrible rainy day, and even though it's spring, you still feel like something a bit more wintry. So your food choices are, I think, very weather dependent as well as what's available.
And of course, in addition to the TV, you're also doing the book. Now, there's over 200 recipes in the book. I mean, which comes first? You know, is it a chicken and egg? Do you start the TV first?
No,
No,
you have to plan, and it becomes. The idea of a book, which you know so well, is that it needs to feel seamless and it needs to feel whole, and it's sort of almost that less is more thing. So you start somewhere and then you pare back, and what I found with this was I started this very complicated grid, and it needed to be complicated because you had all of these harvests that were happening at different times, and then you had to work back from there into creating menus that were interesting and different enough but also very accessible. And I think one of the things that's so lucky about living in New Zealand is we have this global pantry at our fingertips. So to take advantage of that and show people that just by bringing a new flavour into your kitchen, like pomegranate molasses or quinoa or something like this, it's a very simple way to make interesting food, and it doesn't have to be expensive. So this grid then came down to a series of 13 episodes and X number of recipes, and we really needed to nail it down before we started filming because I had to plant everything.
Right. And of course the book is full of hundreds of gorgeous full colour photographs, and you give acknowledgement to your partner Ted Hewitson for his photography and to Andy Woods for his garden photography. Can you say something about them, and also are you able to use images from the television in the book or not?
No, interestingly, I'll go to the last question first. The thing about the television images is that the DPI on them is really fine for if we wanted to have them on the web, but for printing you actually need a higher quality, or for this kind of printing that we were wanting to do, you need a higher quality resolution and image. And I was very lucky, I think, in life to have married the man that I did. Ted Hewitson is my husband, and he is extremely clever and very good at lots of things I'm not, like banking and budgets. I had to hide the budget for this one from him because it just got bigger and bigger, but I just knew it was my 21st. I needed to indulge myself. And so he's got a beautiful eye, and he actually designed our whole studio and everything. He's a very, very talented visual person. And Andy Woods is a neighbour who lived nearby, and he took a few of the garden images in here. Ted actually took lots of those as well. And then we brought on board this. We make this whole thing in-house. So the team that we have, I've got a wonderful photographer, Kirsty Taylor, who works with me, Melissa, a fabulous designer and photographer. We had 4 designers working on this book, and 3 photographers, as well as Ted and Andy.
Well, it certainly shows it's truly beautiful. Well done.
Thank you.
And one of the features for me was the double page spreads. You've got your garden in Wanaka, double page spread for each season, you know, with the snow at the beginning and going through. Those are examples of Andy Wood's photography, are they?
No, I took those.
You took those.
Jack of all trades. I can often see something, you know, and when I see it, it's like, oh my gosh, I can see that idea, I've got to get it. And it'll be snowing up in the garden, and that was when I got the idea. I thought, because you see it in summer when the dahlias are just lush and the whole thing's just this profusion. And then the bareness of winter with the snow on it especially, I could visually see it. So I raced up the hill in the snow and grabbed those. And then I think that was one of the things about the garden was just looking at that ebb and flow, and you see it on the series. So we put the camera in the same place, and then you see the transition through the seasons.
And of course in Wanaka, the
so
seasons
dramatic.
are so different, and aren't they, as opposed to Auckland, where your garden looks largely the same year round.
Exactly, whereas down there is this complete cut-off. And you know, I always think winter's bareness has its own rewards. You know, there's this lovely, there seems to be nothing, but there is so much.
One of the things in here that you took out, fridge fixings.
Yes.
That's a term that you've invented, I think. I mean, tell us about fridge fixings.
Fridge fixings really started when I had little children, and I was extremely busy, and my children, both of them, had incredibly bland palates. I think it actually can happen to lots of parents, but mine, I was almost embarrassed. Here I was supposed to be a foodie, and I had the most unadventurous, you know, eaters in my family. And so Rose just ate plain boiled pasta with Parmesan cheese and olive oil, and Sean just ate mashed potatoes and sausages. They didn't like what the other one liked. And rather than suffering the fate of these endlessly dull meals, I came up with this idea of fridge fixings, that I could make something, have it in the fridge as a sort of flavour booster or a starting point, and they could have their really boring meal. And instead of having to go and cook a whole other meal, I could transform something in that meal with my fridge fixings to make something interesting. So there's a whole spread at the beginning devoted to these, and I think they're a very good way to give your food a signature, and also to speed up the preparation, so you're not just going from ground zero. And actually the marmalade is a perfect example of that.
Right. Do you have a favourite season yourself for cooking?
I probably love the end of summer. just because everything is coming into full fruition, and you've got all of the taste of a whole year's growth and sweetness of the sun. And so, and there's just so much choice. But at the moment, you know, it's just all these new, very fresh, green, soft tastes. It's quite magical. So every season has its own moments, but the autumn is very thrilling.
How would you sum up your cooking philosophy in a few sentences?
Yeah, I think for me, the idea for me about cooking is about connectedness. And cooking connects you not just to nature and the environment, but it connects you to your own culture, other cultures, the community around you, your friends, your family, and your own creativity. And I think that if I can show people how easy it is to make those connections, then no matter what the big things are in your life, you know, and you can't often change the big things like where you live or where your kids go to school or all sorts of things you've got no control over. But cooking is something that allows you to, I think, craft. I've always found this for myself. You can craft a very good life because you bring people together around the table. And you could have had a horrible day at work, but you can come home and you can create this moment. And in that moment, it connects you and you can feel very whole.
Well, I was very lucky to meet the wonderful Ali Smith at the Edinburgh Book Festival. She was one of the guest selectors, and she interviewed a number of the authors that she'd invited. She's an extremely clever woman and also a very funny one. And I arrived back in New Zealand to discover that How to Be Both, her latest novel, has just been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, the Man Booker Prize, I should say. So I was very delighted about that. It's an extraordinary book and quite difficult to describe. It's in two separate halves. The particular edition that I picked up to bring today to the studio has got the artist's story in the front, and it has the pair of eyes. My advice to readers is to start with the second story, which in some editions is the first story, that has the camera at the front. Now, they're two separate stories, but they interlink. The story with the camera is set in modern times, and it's about a girl, a young teenage girl, who is in shock and in grief because her mother has just died. I think if you read that story first, you will understand the story of the painter much better. He's a Renaissance painter. He's painting frescoes in the city of Ferrara in Italy. Now, the girl has been taken with her young brother to Ferrara to look at these wonderful paintings that her mother was really passionate about. After her mother dies, she realises there is one painting in a gallery in Britain, in London, and she goes regularly to visit that painting. The painter is in purgatorium, and he's sort of floating around and is aware that this person who he initially thinks is a boy is watching his painting, sitting, coming, visiting regularly, sitting, watching his painting. And he's rather chuffed because there are paintings in this same gallery by his rivals, and she doesn't look at them, just looks at this one painting. And the two stories interlink. It's hard to describe. It is extremely unusual. It is genre bending in the way she constructs the novel. It's also gender bending. It's very funny. It's full of poetry. It's full of joy. It's full of grief and sadness, and is quite unlike anything that I have ever read before. It analyses art, particularly the art of fresco painting. It looks at friendship, the friendship between these two girls in this photo. The main character has a young friend who leaves and goes to Scandinavia. They still connect to each other through texting and all the modern sort of ways. The painter has a friend who leaves. They still connect with each other and get back together again. So it's about friendship, relationships, art, grief. And the actual style of the novel is so unusual that it is quite extraordinary, confusing at times, but absolutely joyous, and I totally loved it. And I am hoping that the wonderful, slightly crazy Ali Smith will actually win the Booker Prize.
Well, Carol, that's the show for this week. I really enjoyed myself, actually.
Well, I did too. I love talking to you, Graham. And we'll be doing it every week
for a while.
We will. And next week I'm talking to Kennedy Warren about a lovely new New Zealand non-fiction title.
And I'll talk to Fiona Sussman about her novel set in apartheid South Africa. So good reading, everybody.